Thanks, Brad. That's such an important aspect of all of oncology, but certainly adolescent young adults, and you illustrated it quite well. I kept on thinking during Brad's talk, although it was a bit Hollywoodized, of the movie 50/50, which some of you know we had a showing of when it first came out, and most of the issues that Brad talked about are illustrated in that movie. And although it's a little bit Hollywoodized, I still recommend, if you haven't seen the movie, get the tape and see it, because it really is very instructive, and they did a good job of really trying to hit most issues. I think the only one missed was the insurance issue. So our next speaker is just another one of the group of stars we have today speaking with us. Brandon Hayes Ladden serves as the senior medical advisor to the Livestrong Foundation. His home is as associate professor of medicine in the Division of Hematology at the Oregon Health Sciences University, where he's the director of the Knight Cancer Institute's Adolescent Young Adult Cancer Program. Really, I would say probably the first effort to develop an AYA program, and Brandon's been a pioneer all along. My interactions with Brandon have gone over many years in his leadership of the Young Adult Alliance, first under when we were part of Livestrong, and then when we developed as a separate organization as Critical Mass. He serves as chair of the board of that organization. He also is the champion for the AYA effort in the Southwest Oncology Group, and partners with people like David Fryer, who you'll hear shortly, who's working on the COG side to really develop new initiatives that you may hear about in the AYA area that are going to impact our clinical trials programs nationally at this very critical juncture. So it's really a great pleasure for me to introduce Brandon, who's going to talk about the methods or programs for delivering care to AYA patients, which obviously in our program at this point is a very critical issue. So Brandon, welcome.
Thank you. I think I'm good.
Do you need the? You got it.
I got it on.
Right.
You guys can hear me, yeah? Thank you. It's really, really a privilege to be here. I got to say, I've been thinking about adolescent young adult oncology for a long time now, and to come to a place where you have the Cancer Center director in the room demonstrating, the commitment of the entire institution to this effort. At the same time, having a family who's not only supporting it with raising money towards the cause, but personally being here and telling their story, that's magic. This is really an exciting place to be. Before I get started, I also want to wish you all a very happy Movember. So if you see me doing this all through the talk, this is not the way I normally look. My wife wants to make sure you understand that. So I'm going to make an attempt at sort of a daunting thing, which is talk about how might you build and implement a care program for adolescents and young adults with cancer. I mean, really, what you just heard was an overview of some really challenging biomedical issues and psychosocial issues, and we're all here because we're committed to addressing those problems. But how might we go about doing that? And so the questions I'm going to try to touch on are really, why build an AYA oncology program? And I think that's pretty clear. It's to deliver quality care for adolescents and young adults. And I'm going to talk about a couple of efforts to describe what quality care for an adolescent and young adult with cancer might look like, efforts that were spearheaded in part by the Livestrong Young Adult Alliance, which is now a separate organization called Critical Mass, and another by a group of medical institutions that are called the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, or NCCN. Then I'm going to take on the idea of, well, how would you build an AYA program? And really, I'm going to spend time here taking a look at some of the early adopters. We have done a survey, really, across the United States of who is trying to do what and how is that looking so far. And then I'll wind up with some of the future directions for AYA oncology programs, really with the notion that we need to keep this ball rolling, we're going to really need to demonstrate the impact we're having. So the first, sorry, I use a Mac, so part of that might have been, no, it's on there. The first effort at defining what quality cancer care for adolescents and young adults really came from a position statement written by authors that you know well. This was published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, which in our world is sort of the hallmark journal. And this was a consensus of both clinical care providers as well as patient advocates and survivors themselves, taking a look at, well, what really are the critical elements that we would want to assemble to deliver quality care for an AYA. And the summary is listed here. And you've heard some examples just in the last two talks about these issues. The critical elements would include things like the ability to detect and diagnose these cancers early, and then to launch into a timely referral, initiation of treatment, and importantly, adhering to that treatment ongoing. Provider knowledge about the unique biomedical and psychosocial issues that you just heard about. Sponsoring AYA-specific research. What is different about cancer in this group, both in terms of the biomedical and the psychosocial? How do we assist young adults with disease and treatment side effects? And this can be routine symptoms of disease and treatment or unique ones to AYA, like fertility and body image. A cognizance of the unique psychosocial growth and developmental issues for this patient population. Formal assessment and attention given to cognition and psychiatric needs that occur in this population. Referral to resources that are age appropriate. And then a facilitation of transition to survivorship, because as you heard, actually the majority of patients will in fact be survivors of their cancer. So these are sort of the critical elements that if you're going about designing an AYA program, you would want to consider. More recently, a group of institutions through the NCCN have gotten together and produced guidelines for the practice of oncology that include specific recommendations for AYA. And this is important because one of the things that you might have picked up from Archie is that the vast majority of young adult patients actually are not treated in comprehensive cancer centers like this. They're treated in the community, and the NCCN is often a go-to source for that. So this helps our movement in terms of spreading the word throughout the oncology community. So when the NCCN took a look at guidelines, you'll see that there's some overlap. The first is comprehensive assessment that includes delivering age-appropriate information to patients and assessing not only their medical cancer situation, but fertility, their psychosocial needs, and genetic and familial risk, because this is actually the patient population where those issues are most commonly found. They have specific guidelines for what it means to develop age-appropriate care for treatment-related issues focused on adolescents and young adults, including things like dosing and toxicity and how that's managed and how that may be different from how it's managed in young children or older patients. Fertility and other endocrine considerations. So in addition to childbearing capacity, there are many other endocrine systems that can be affected, and considering that in terms of treatment design is important. Psychosocial and behavioral considerations that range from those for the individual, but also the relationships, so their family, friends, etc., and their socioeconomic situation. Again, an early attention to survivorship, because some of the decisions made at the time of designing a treatment for an adolescent young adult are going to have a direct impact in their long-term survivorship issues. And then some disease-specific issues, and in this particular guideline they chose ALL, sarcoma, colon cancer, and melanoma, where there are examples of things that really need to be paid attention to specifically related to age. And then finally, to round out the entire cancer continuum with AYA-specific considerations in palliative care and end of life. So this kind of gives you a spectrum of how we take all the biomedical and psychosocial issues that you just heard about from the last two talks and organize them into sort of the buckets of, well, what would you assemble to create a quality AYA program? So from there, really in the last decade or less, there have been attempts to create AYA programs. And this has happened really worldwide, and I'm just going to focus in the United States. In the United States, most of this has been individually championed efforts that have grown up independently. So there hasn't been sort of a coordinated model to, well, how would you take these considerations and these guidelines and apply them to building a program? In fact, many times when people ask me to talk about my program, they ask, well, how do I introduce this? Is it one of a few? Is it one of the first? Is it one of 10, 20? How many are there actually? And the truth is, it was really hard to even answer that question. So Livestrong and Critical Mass, this organization actually sponsored work to take a survey in the last year of AYA programs in the United States. So what have we learned about the current landscape? So in the U.S., there were 23 self-identified AYA programs from cancer centers. And these were identified sort of with this broad net of everything from, internet searches to word of mouth. Of those 23, 20 programs turned out were reachable. There was actually a person on the other end of the phone or an email to contact to ask questions about their AYA program. And 20 of these programs were invited to participate, and all did, in a two-part information gathering process. So one was a phone-based interview where there was a template based on those NCCN care guidelines I showed you that was reviewed with their AYA program. And the second part was a survey that looked specifically at the first example, the Livestrong Young Adult Alliance critical elements, and trying to map what these programs are doing with regards to those guidelines and criteria. So overall, there were really 8 program components that emerged across the 20 respondents, and they fell in these categories: psychosocial care, an AYA approach to treatment, developing financial and other concrete resources, fertility, the importance of education and communication, and that's broad across both patients and providers, palliative care, survivorship care, and a research component. In terms of what these mean, these were mapped to the NCCN guidelines and the Livestrong guidelines. You can see that psychosocial care included everything from assessment and attention to psychosocial care to actually developing interventions. Approaches to treatment that included things like how do you ensure adherence or considerate dose and toxicity management. Financial and concrete resources and how those are linked to things like government benefits that may apply to young adults. Fertility, which range from discussing risk of infertility from cancer or its treatment and what options and referrals are available. Education and communication, and that included things like patient and family about the diagnosis and treatment, as well as establishing other lines of communication across their institution. Palliative care, with the introduction of that early and addressing some of the unique psychosocial and advocacy issues that young adults might face. Survivorship care, and then research, that really specific areas of research that are AYA focused. In terms of the structure of these 20 respondents, it was highly varied. So 10 of the 20 were really pediatric-based. These were AYA programs that lived within, for instance, a children's hospital. 7 of them were adult-based, so these were AYA programs that really lived in a medical oncology setting. And really only 3 of these 20s were quote-unquote bridge programs where there was specific co-leadership between the pediatric world and the medical oncology world. So if you think about the example that we're here today to launch at USC and Children's Hospital, that would be a bridge example. As you heard, the NCI definition of the age range adolescent and young adult is diagnosed between 15 and 39. At the time of this survey, only 10 of those 20 programs were actually serving that entire age range. In the pediatric-based programs, 2 were serving 15 to 21-year-olds and 3 were serving 15 to 29-year-olds. And then 5 out of the 7 adult-based AYA programs didn't start until the age of 18. Other structural components included the identification of an AYA champion. And you can see that 19 out of 20 said that this was a huge component of their program, that really having someone who took it on to really take the responsibility to drive the program forward was important. And 14 of these 20 programs reported that they felt like they actually owned program staff. That while much of what is done across an AYA program is borrowed and stolen and, friends, and that's important because the range of services really covers a whole lot of personnel. But at the same time, if you're really going to have an AYA program, do you actually control any staff? So what does that look like? So in the blue are personnel that were identified as actually being part of the AYA program team. In the red are personnel who participated in the AYA program but weren't necessarily considered part of the core team. They were just available in that institution. And then the green were partners who were outside of the institution but that helped with personnel issues. So you can see that, again, out of these 20, the majority had a pediatric oncologist as part of the AYA team. Many had oncology nurses as part of the AYA team. Just over half described themselves as having mental health providers as part of the AYA team, but virtually all reported that resource was within their institution. Here you see that medical oncology, adult medical oncologists like myself, are a rarity to be actually a core part of these AYA programs, although most centers either had a medical oncology within their institution or as a partner. And then primary care, when you think about both the early diagnosis and the transition to survivorship, was less likely to be part of the clinical personnel. Here's the same sort of information about the supportive care services with the same sort of breakdown. So blue is that these are supportive care services that were a core part of their AYA program, and the red is these were services available at the institution, although they weren't necessarily AYA specific. And you can see that some things like peer support and child of life were really often part of the core AYA service team. But many others, while available at the institution, were serving as liaisons or partners. And that included things like palliative care, genetic counseling, chaplaincy, or nutritional services. While those were available at the institution, they weren't necessarily AYA specific. So in summarizing the common activities and the common components across these 20, there were really three highlights. One was fertility. Fertility was seen as a core component to the vast majority of these centers. And what that really meant in terms of activities were a general discussion of risks and options, an early referral, oftentimes within 24 hours, and considering that fertility preservation is really an essential part of the care for AYAs with cancer. Another really common component was education and communication, and the activities there included age-appropriate information. So whether that be the flyers in the lobby or the toxicities to expect with a chemotherapy regimen, or the support groups available, that was really age-appropriate information. The development of online resources, and this is often thought to be important in this population who are often online. And education that included facilitating communication between the patient and provider. And then the third most common component across these 20 centers was psychosocial intervention, and the common activities here were really a range of things like social recreational programming, face-to-face peer support, camps and retreats, online peer support, other support for communication, and support groups. And then while it wasn't really one of the most common, it was often cited as one of the most important, was research. And to dig in a little bit in terms of what activities these centers are doing in terms of AYA-specific research, 8 of the 20 said that they were directly engaged in adolescent and young adult oncology research. And that often looked like collaboration, either with other established AYA programs or with other departments across their own institution. There was a really wide variety of personnel engaged in research. And this included often interns, medical students, new fellows, as sort of a ripe opportunity to engage in research in a new field. The requirement for an interdisciplinary team, and really only in a few instances were there faculty with protected time dedicated to AYA research. The funding and support for this research often involved pursuing federal and local funding, but most often involved philanthropic funds and fundraising events, and to support faculty as they prepared for grants. And then finally, in terms of specific activities for AYA research, it involved accrual efforts across the cooperative group clinical trials. In addition, 14 of the 20 said they had a focus in promoting research, although their program may or may not have been directly engaged in AYA research. And again, this was really about the communication that AYA studies are available and important, and communicating that in meetings and emails, delivering education to about the need for research to a whole range of audiences, including faculty and staff, as well as foundations. Disseminating AYA research opportunities and results, and beginning the AYA research agenda with assessing their own clinical trial enrollment. So I think overall that kind of gives you a snapshot of really in early 2013 what AYA programming looks like in the United States, and how that might map to some of those guidelines and critical elements listed before. So how do we pull that together and actually start an AYA program? There was an article written, I believe this was in 2010, published in the JCO, and I actually just took a look at it this week. And many of the same ideas and recommendations, I think, still apply. So I think this is a valuable resource. The themes really are, I think, the culture. So the idea that you can assemble a room of a couple hundred people on a Saturday morning, that demonstrates a culture of understanding this is a unique population, and that we're going to do something about it. And identifying AYA champions that you've heard from today. A culture that really focuses on the relationship between the pediatric and adult world. So it's not enough just to schedule joint meetings, but it really requires a level of communication and a level of respect, and often a level of compromise between these two worlds in their approach. And then the concrete ideas of actually agreeing on things like, well, what age are we talking about? What diseases are we targeting? Which of that menu of services are we going to prioritize? I think another key theme is, how do you find early wins? So you heard Archie talk about turf. I think as you're beginning an AYA program, you want to look for some of those turf-neutral wins. And in my mind, some of those examples are things like fertility. So fertility preservation targets this age population, but it doesn't take one oncologist and their approach and pit them against another. It's a shared issue. The same can be said often with psychosocial services, or even a research agenda, where it can really be cross-cutting. I think another theme in terms of early wins are policy changes. So examples here include, again, fertility, where an institution can institute a policy that says all patients of reproductive age must be informed of their risk and given options. And again, that's a turf-neutral thing. It's supported by professional society recommendations. Potentially even your legal department would like that. So those sorts of cross-cutting policy changes are important. One example that we recently did in Oregon had to do with our cancer committee reporting. That now at every cancer committee, if the patient is between the age of 15 and 39, there's a checklist that they must go through that certain issues were discussed. Themes around staffing requirements. Again, as you saw from the examples, these models include AYA program-specific staff, institutional staff who aren't necessarily part of or paid by the program, but share in their resources, or true external partners. And figuring out the staffing requirements and that balance is really important. And then outreach. And this includes advocacy, education, and philanthropy efforts. Where are we going next? I think the future of the development and the fostering of AYA programs is here. We're going to need to demonstrate that all of this effort actually leads to better outcomes. And so I want to list a few potential metrics for how you would consider, is your AYA program doing what it hopes to do, and are you able to demonstrate that? And really, there's a wide range of how you might do that. Everything from accruals, and that could be accruals to your AYA program or just young people at your institution. Are we seeing a shift there? Or across the community? Space and resources. Is your institution dedicating specific areas? And that might be a resource room, or it might be a whole wing of a hospital. But are you, you can measure, are there space and other resources dedicated to AYA? Online resources. Is there spots on your website where you can find AYA? Patient care metrics. So you can take a look at interventions made by the AYA program and see, are you making a difference in terms of symptom control, and does that correlate with adherence to therapy? You can take a look at the number of fertility referrals made. Metrics around patient education and social interaction. So how many retreats or support groups or conferences are you sponsoring? How many social media hits do you actually enjoy? And patient satisfaction metrics. There's also provider satisfaction metrics and provider knowledge. Provider knowledge can be everything from informal or formal consult use to formal fellowship training. Metrics around research, and that can be simple, like accruals to clinical trials, the number of bank specimens or publications. And then finally, finances. Are you actually generating any clinical revenue? As you heard from Archie, this is 6% of the cancer population. That's actually a fair amount of revenue. Is it actually attributed to the AYA program? And how are you metricing your program in terms of the ability to get grants or the ability to earn donations? So that's really the summary I have. I think we know a little bit about the things Archie said and the things Brad said, and boil those down into clinical recommendations, guidelines, what are the critical elements. We've seen some of the examples across the United States of how that's beginning to be assembled and what those components look like. And I think really the future directions are, as we get better at it, as we are able to better metric our impact, how will we standardize the delivery of AYA care? I think as a field we need to agree on what really are the most meaningful AYA outcomes, develop those methods, those metrics, and then jointly do the health services research to show impact. I think the other really important future direction is sustainability, that often these programs are championed by individuals like Stu or myself who have drunk the Kool-Aid, and we get it. But that's not enough. It's enough to get the program off the ground. But really, how do we continue to support those AYA champions? How do we foster the sort of administrative leadership that you heard about here? How do we take a look at clinical revenue and whether the AYA program is having an impact and should get credit for that? And how do we tell this story in a way that helps gain philanthropic support? So with that, I'll wrap it up, and I think we have a panel session next.